Good morning, Ignite Church. I'm excited actually today and not super nervous, but I'm not sure my heart's supposed to beat this fast, but I am excited. And what my mom was saying was pretty cool. I'd never heard that before, but I was shocked to hear that actually just now because my mom doesn't I kind of kept a secret to everyone, even my wife, about my message. I gave him nuggets, but I kind of kept it a secret. So it's funny as the message goes on, you'll kind of see what my mom was saying, and it's kind of funny. But it's strange being standing here. You wouldn't think it would be standing here and just being right there, but it's funny. It's like what, 3 steps? 1, 2, 3. It's funny how we let fear, because I've been running or avoiding this exact spot for a long time. And it's funny what fear does, because that's 3 steps from where I normally am. And that hit me hard. I came up with, I thought about that the other day. It's just 3 steps. Fear and uncomfort, being uncomfortable, took me just 3 steps to get to where I'm at right now. And it's just funny. But I kind of just want to talk about how I got the message and kind of start with that before I get into it. I actually got the message just sitting right there on the drums. Near the end of a service one time, I just felt something powerful, and I think it was Pastor Toyin, of course, was doing extra exhortation at the end, and she said something about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and those are fun to say over and over throughout this message. But she said something, and I didn't steal this from her, but she said something that just sparked in me, and I just ran with it. It was exciting for me to feel something like that, and I wasn't sure where it was coming from. It was just sitting there worshiping, like, just the end of a song. I wasn't even playing, and something just started to form into me, and a message. And at first, I thought it was just for me. I thought it was something God was showing me, and I got really excited because it was pretty awesome. And it was little at first. It started with a little bit, and it started growing. Weeks went by. It started growing into something bigger, and me, Michelle, Levi, and Megan went to a worship conference to pretty much just to see my brother Tim, because he was in town from New Mexico. But also Leland, if you ever heard of Leland, the worship team, the worship man, was doing worship that night, and that was exciting for us. So we went out just to kind of worship and do something different and see my brother Tim. And that night ended up being really big for me. It actually ended up being one of the main reasons I'm up here tonight. And that's because it was just such great worship. But during that worship time, I felt like he was just downloading this entire message right into me. Just worshiping, listening to Leland, and just loving every moment of it. But then Darlene Check came up and started preaching. And if you know who she is, I believe the old Hillsong's worship leader in the beginning. And man, she's powerful. But she was preaching, and I don't want to go into really what she was preaching, but it was really powerful to me. But it was funny, at the same time, I'm just like getting excited because God's putting something else in me. At the moment, I'm listening to her preach. And it's funny how you can still focus on what you're getting from her, but God give you something at the same time. And I was getting excited, and I kept it a secret because, once it gets out, then I'm gonna be up here preaching it. but I kept it in me for a while, and that was the night where it grew into something, and God kind of told me that this wasn't just for you. And that was hard to hear at first, because I've been 3 steps over that way. I've been there my whole life, and like my mom said, in the background is where I like to serve. I like to help where I can and where I'm needed, but I don't necessarily want to be the voice of where I'm needed. But God's pushing me. He's challenging me to do something uncomfortable. And if you've noticed, he's asking a lot of us to do things that are uncomfortable. And just this very stage is a testimony of it just expanding and stepping out of that comfort zone and into something uncomfortable. But God's telling me, and I feel like he's telling us, that what is uncomfortable at first, he will make comfortable if you just trust him. And I couldn't ignore that, so I had to start really just thinking about this. And at this point, I had already even like applied this to my life. I was already excited and just like running with it, but he was starting to give me words to speak and say that this is not just for you. I want you to share it. And that was tough, but it's funny because my mom and Levi, I'm gonna call it Pastor Mom and Pastor Dad today, but they were talking in just in the house, and I was sitting there watching Chargers lose, and they were talking about finding more speakers just for the end of the month, and at this point I had been keeping it to myself completely, and it's funny how sometimes you don't mean to, but you challenge God, and you're like, I'll obey you, and I want to do this, but I'm gonna keep it to myself until you force me, kind of thing. And it's funny. My mom looks straight at me and she goes, "Do you have anything?" And I'm like, "I see what you did, God. That was sneaky," and I couldn't deny it. I couldn't run from it anymore. And I don't mean it like I was really running from it, but just for a lack of better words, it was time to be obedient and do what the Lord asked, and stepping out of my comfort zone. And that's kind of the core of this message, in a sense of where it started. But that was all stuff I got actually after I had started getting this message. And today this message is going to be focusing on Daniel 3, about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace and what they conquered. And we was talking to Megan on the way here, and it's such a funny story because it's very short. It's very, very small, and you hear it. It's a Sunday school story. It's always in Sunday school. It's like you grow up hearing Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace, the lion's den, Noah. And sometimes I feel like there's a tendency to not write it off, but think about it as a child's thing, a story. And it's just a story, but it's so much more powerful than you can imagine for such a small story. And this is why I got so excited when I started getting stuff from it, because you'll see in such a small story of what you can pull out of it. And I just want to begin by reading Daniel 3 and kind of narrating at the same time and just stopping and going. But I want to give you a little backstory about Daniel and what has led up to Daniel 3. So obviously in Daniel's 1 and 2. So at this point, King Nebuchadnezzar has had a dream, and he's looking for anyone to interpret it. And he's looking for anyone. He's searching everywhere to find this, and Daniel has it. Daniel has the interpretation which the Lord has given him, and it's funny because you'll see later on as I go, Daniel gives him this dream interpretation, and King Nebuchadnezzar is blown away. And at this moment, he is saying God is the true God. He knows God at this moment. He has already been shown God as the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And it's funny because it leads right into Daniel 3, and somehow he forgot. So so as he does that, Daniel interprets the dream, the king's blown away, and he promotes Daniel. And he sets him up in, where is it? Babylon, I think. Yes. And then it's funny. And then Daniel petitions to the king to promote Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and over the province of Babylon. So he got his friends a promotion too, which is pretty awesome in the story itself. But I'm not going to get into that yet. But I just want to start with Daniel 3. So that's kind of where we're at. The king and Daniel has been set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have been promoted. So I want to begin in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So all the important people. He's throwing a big party, and he invited everybody. Well, the most important people. So in verse 2? 3, sorry. So all the important people, because it repeats so much. But let me see. King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. They stood before the image of Nebuchadnezzar and that he had set up, the gold image. Then the herald cried out loud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at this time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and I can't say that one. Does anyone know what that one is? Psaltery? I've been trying to figure out how to say it for a long time. In the symphony with all kinds of music. You shall fall down and worship the gold image that the king Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a fiery furnace." So that's pretty extreme. So at the time when all the people heard the sound of all the instruments in all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they're just playing music, they're supposed to bow down once they hear this music. So it's just funny because the rest of the story. Therefore, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said, "King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. So this is funny. I like this part. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, all that music, in symphony," where am I? "Then you shall bow down." It's so funny because King Nebuchadnezzar is like, "I kind of like you guys. I already promoted you, so I'm going to give you a second chance. Like, I'm not sure you heard the music, heard the sound. So we're going to play it again and give you a second chance because I don't want to throw you into the fire. But I said I would. And I'm the king, so I have to do what I decree." So it's just funny because you could see King Nebuchadnezzar's personality a little bit right here and the fact that he liked these three men. And I just think it's funny because of the way he said it. "I'll give you one more chance." But the response was even better. So, where am I? 16. Oh, wait, well, it's very important actually in the end of 15. "You shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" And that was big. He shouldn't have said that. That's for sure. Because that was a test. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. And the next verse is very powerful. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And that is big, because they believed with all their heart that God would save them. But they said, but if not. So in my interpretation, that's, we will give our lives no matter what. Even if God doesn't save us from this fiery furnace, we know where we're going. We know something greater. So they were focused on something greater than themselves. And I love that part of the verse. And they were so bold in saying that. And that was strong. And he was willing to give them a second chance. But that didn't change what they had originally thought. We're not going to bow down to anything other than our God, or the true God. So the next verse 9, saved in the fiery trial. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and so his expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And so the king was showing his power. He was frustrated and that they would not obey him, even though he knew back in Daniel 2 that they were serving the right God. But he was extremely mad. You could see this as his facial expressions changed, because at the moment he liked Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but because they challenged him, he had to put on a strong face. He had to get heated, and not only did he do that, he heated this furnace 7 times hotter. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, but that's pretty extreme. And then verse 20, and then he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's a little sneak peek of their glory already and their faith, because they should have also been burned at that moment. And these 2 men, like, can you imagine that kind of heat? I know you get close to a fireplace to get warm, but can you imagine walking up and in a moment that's it? It burned alive. That's crazy. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't. They were fine in that moment. So I like that a little sneak peek of what's coming. And in verse 23, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And I'm going to really touch on that later, but the form, he can see the form of the Son of God on a 4th man. Can you imagine a fiery furnace so hot and so big? I'm assuming it's holding 4 men. He can tell on a 4th that it's the form of the Son of God. And I'm going to touch on that a lot more, but could you? how many people could actually, even just relatively speaking, in the flames, burning up, they're not burning up, but in the flames, he can tell the form of God? He doesn't really know God, in a sense, does he? He has looking for all the wrong ways to interpret his dream, and Daniel shows him, and then he confesses that he knows God, but he doesn't really in this point, obviously, because he's done some wrong things up to this point. So you can see that he doesn't really know God, but at the same time, somehow he can see the form of God. And I'm going to touch on that, obviously, some more. But in the four men in the fire, I love that part when I was a kid in the story. It's like you can just see it. Four men, there's only threw three in, but there's four. And I'm going to continue, but I'll come back to that later. And then Nebuchadnezzar praises God. So verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. Just walked out. That's just crazy. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. Their hair, the hair of their head, was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. That's a testimony right there. 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nations, or language who speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made in an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And then I love the last verse. It's funny. Verse 30, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So that's Daniel 3, and that's the story that I'm going to focus more on and even dive back into a little bit. But such a strange but powerful story, and I'll show you what I'm getting from it. And I just love how different things happen, and the king does see the power, and then he starts saying loud that you serve the Most High God. And I just love how he sees God in the fire and then confesses it out loud. So I want to go get into my message. I'm going to do a couple points. You could write them down if you want, if you're doing notes or anything, but they're not going to be on the screen or anything. But I want to start with my point number 1, and it's going to focus on this. Bowing wasn't an option. They would not bow. You could see in the story that they never even thought about that. That was never the answer. And do you imagine what kind of courage that takes? He had all the important people. He had, I'm assuming, a big image of gold. Everybody was doing it. Everybody was bowing down. But they knew that was wrong because they knew God. They knew what was on their hearts, and they believed and trusted God in it, that he would save them. And they acted on it, which is powerful in itself. It's hard not to bow down in these days. There's work, there's coworkers. I mean, not coworkers, but there's bosses. There's just, normal things in life where you feels like you don't have a choice, but God's showing us an example of our choices in this story. And I want to just touch on a couple more. And then that one verse when it says, but we will not, even if he does not save us, we will still not bow down. And I love that. That's that. But we will give our lives for our cause, a righteous cause, the cause that God has appointed us to. And sorry, my notes are hard to read sometimes. I wrote them all nice too, all day yesterday. But that I love. I think the powerful part in that verse is the but. Which is funny. I don't mean it like that. You guys all laugh. Um, but we will, no matter what, we will still not serve your gods. He's telling them straight to King Nebuchadnezzar's face, we will not worship you. And that's hard. That's the king. Imagine, I mean, the power he has. Obviously, he turns up the heat, but he grabs his two best men. He bounds them up immediately. That's the president. I mean, he tells you to do something, or someone higher up in your life, and it's the wrong thing to do. Can you not bow down? Can you say that? Because that's not something you would think's easy at first. You kind of say, oh yeah, probably. But in the moment, with the way it's all set up, that must have been hard. And the Bible, it's so funny. They're such men of few words. They get a couple lines in the story, but you can tell. Why is it just me, or does it just would they have just walked into the fire if King Nebuchadnezzar told them? Like, the story paints a picture where these men had so much faith that they would do anything except for bow down to him and his gods. But they had already been serving the king. Like, they were servants, and it was only because the king lost sight of God that that caused them to do this unrighteous thing. And I feel like it can be like that in our lives. Our bosses can tell us things that we might know is wrong in our hearts to do. And are we strong enough to tell him no, even though he's our boss? Because that's kind of the situation you're in with King Nebuchadnezzar and those three men. He's his boss and their king, and I assume they admire him. He's already promoted them, and that's why the king likes them. They had a relationship. He gave him a second chance, but they knew he was doing something that God didn't intend, and that he lost sight of something that Daniel had showed him just one chapter ago. And I'm going to touch on some more of that. Let me see. But the king gets mad and turns up the heat. Isn't that funny how that just when they feel disobeyed, that they get more mad, right? They turn it up because they're your superior in a sense, that you have to listen to them. But that's not the case. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And if it's wrong in the Lord's eyes, it's definitely wrong. And you should be able to stand up for God and tell people and not be intimidated by the heat. And a lot of the times we are. And I'm not saying that for anyone in here. A lot of times I am. I'm trying to focus on where I have this. They were strong. They were really strong. And it didn't faze them that he turned up the heat 7 times. 7 times. Not 1, not 2. 7 times. And it didn't faze them. They don't get quoted a couple verses down, but I feel like it's the same heat it was before. It's still wrong. So I kind of want to just lead into my next point, but that's something that spoke to me right away, and being able to trust God in the heat, in the times where it feels hot and you're being pressured or you're being pushed to do something you know is not right, because you're a Christian, you know what the word says. And I love that these men it didn't faze them, and they were strong enough to just go where the Lord told him to go. And I want to lead that into my next point, point number 2, in strength in numbers. A little warrior saying, but I didn't think of that on purpose, but it was funny. I just came up with that. It must just be in my mind. 3 men together trusting and believing in God. Is that a coincidence that it was three men built in faith together? Is that an example of friendship strengthening each other? Is that an example of not being alone in your walk? Is that an example of what friendship looks like and what it should look like? That they would resist together. And you like to think that they couldn't do it on their own, but they probably could. But I like that God picks these 3 men. You don't really hear about them much more in the Bible. But these 3 men, I felt like they held each other accountable. They were keeping each other strong. Because you got to imagine they have very few words, but they're being told to bow down. They're being told they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, and they're like, don't do it. You know, he's strengthening each other. They're holding hands in a sense that nothing will break these 3 men. But if one starts to feel weary, he's not going to let him go. And I love that part that they weren't alone. And I feel like that's something you can pull from this very strongly, because they were ready to be thrown into a fire. They were ready to give their lives for what they believed, and what they believed was greater than the king Nebuchadnezzar and anyone could even see at that moment. But they knew something was at work here. God had set him up in this place to take him to this place. And I think that's the importance of godly people in your life, because we can't do this alone. And this world needs us to strengthen one another. It gets hard. Life hits you hard sometimes, medically, physically, financially, and we can't always do it alone. And this is a great example of what faith will get you through. And I love that so much. So I'm getting excited. So they resisted together. I love that. But that is actually just, that's all I have for the point in strength in numbers. But I feel like it's really powerful. And I want to lead into my point number 3. And this point number 3 is King Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm going to give you a different view on this story and how to look at it. I'm going to paint you a picture of this whole story, Daniel 3, and I want you to imagine just what we've read. King Nebuchadnezzar is our flesh. Power and corruption is what the king went through. And he focused on himself and lost sight of God, because he had seen what God had done for him in the dream, but he had lost sight of it. And why did he lose sight of it? It was right there for him. And he allowed himself to become a gold image. And I'm going to touch on this really hard. Just like the king, we allow ourselves to become our gold image as our flesh. So I want you to see King Nebuchadnezzar as our flesh in this, in a sense that just like the king, we get distracted sometimes. We get phased in what life hits us with. Or not even that. We stop focusing on God in this day and age of media and TV and entertainment, and not really anyone here probably, but there's some high-end celebrities and stuff that have allowed themselves to become their gold image. And they can't see anything other than themselves. And that's what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. He saw the power, but decided not to do it and run with it. Instead, he set himself up a gold image and told people to worship him. And he was selfish. He was blind. It started to corrupt him. And I wanted to touch more on the flesh, so I put it in my Bible app, flesh, and I wanted to see what scriptures I could pull just from that, and I found one immediately, and I really like it, and I'm going to read it. It's in Galatians 6:8. For he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of Spirit reap everlasting life. So do you see the difference? King Nebuchadnezzar, our flesh, reaped flesh. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they sowed the Spirit. And the Spirit, what they reaped was everlasting life. They couldn't be burned. They could not be burned. They couldn't be burned. So we can't give into our flesh like King Nebuchadnezzar. He lost sight of God, and therefore he was only focused on himself. He forgot what Daniel said to him just 2 chapters ago. Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret to me. It's like, what's wrong with him? Like, he was blinded by himself. How did that happen? And have you lost sight of God? What's greater? We have to ask these questions to ourselves daily, in a sense, because we have to stay accountable to ourselves. And that's why I liked the point before in strength in numbers. Accountability and people holding each other, Christians, to the Word of God, because it's easy to get focused on yourself. It's easy to see that gold image as yourself. And like our flesh, are we not created in God's image? Or have we, like King Nebuchadnezzar, let ourselves become our own gold image? And I'm just like my dad. I love one-liners like that. It could be on a plaque in my house or something. I was like, ooh, that was good. So I'm going to throw that at them. But I want that to just sit in you as a question at the end that leads into point number 4. And I just titled this point, God Reveals Himself to the King. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had the faith to go through. 3 men thrown into the fire, but 4 men appear in the fire? 1 man with the likeness of the Son of God, a shadow in the flames with the likeness of the Son of God. That's King Nebuchadnezzar that notices that and jumps up right away. God opened King Nebuchadnezzar's eyes to see his power. He showed him what he lost sight of. He gave him his sight back. And like I said, we lose sight of ourselves. We lose sight of God and focus on ourselves. King Nebuchadnezzar lost sight of God. But God showed him. You could see it clearly. King Nebuchadnezzar is the only one at first, astonished, notices there's 4 men. But he doesn't just notice that there's 4 men. It's like, hey, wait, didn't we throw 3 in there? No, there's 4. But what he says is powerful because he says he saw the likeness of God on one of them. Can people see the likeness of God in you? Can people see the likeness of God in you? That was one of the things that hit me really hard. Because I want that. I want that. I think we all should want that. Imagine a world where people could see the likeness of God in these days and as a Christian. Imagine that. And I love that because God opened King Nebuchadnezzar's eyes after he had lost sight. It's a second chance that he kind of tried to give, but King Nebuchadnezzar lost sight, and God showed him again. And only those 2 men had to suffer for that, but everyone else was fine. I didn't have that in my notes. But I want to now go into my 5th point, refined through fire. Another view on this, the fiery furnace in this story, I want you to look at as the world. As the world in this story. In this sense, we go through hard times when this world wants to bring us down. Times when it feels like it's hard. When life has caught up to you and you don't necessarily feel like things are going the right way, that you're not in God's plan, you've lost sight. When it feels like you've been thrown into the fire, just like the fiery furnace, this world, you've been thrown into the situations that you didn't see yourself ever in, but that's why it's hard. You've been thrown into the fire, and then it was turned up 7 times. You went through something, and it felt worse. It kept getting worse. 7 times is 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. It started getting hard. It started getting really hard. People don't always make it through, sadly, that fire in their life. And it's sad. There's an answer here, and it's faith. But people, Christians, don't see it. And this is a Sunday school teaching. This is something that God had tried to get in us as kids. And it's been churned up, and you can't get through it. You don't have friends that can pull you out. You don't have family that can pull you out. There's people that are alone. There's people that need us, Christians, to show them what faith can get you through. And the suicide rates have gone up. The poverty's gone up. Like, people don't know what to do. They can't find a way out of the fire, and that's why they give their lives. Pastors give their lives because you can't see how to get out. You don't see a way out. But this word is showing you a way out. And we don't have to feel like there's no hope. Because if anything, this Bible, these words of God are full of hope. It's an example of how to get through the fire in our lives untouched. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Untouched. They couldn't find proof that they were even in the fire. Their hair wasn't singed. Their clothes weren't burnt. They didn't smell like fire. It was like it never touched them. That is crazy. Can you imagine going through the hard times in your life and people can't tell it touched you? People can't tell you were affected by something that hurt. That hurt deep. And I'm not saying you keep it to yourselves, but they just, because it's okay to talk to people, but it's that they can't tell. You're still following God. You're still a Christian, even though it hurts to go through the same thing people go through, but without the answer. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy if you have the answer, but it kind of does, in a sense. And that just kind of, refined through fire. That kind of just leads into another point I have. And there is no clock up there, so I'm just going to go until I get through my point. So my 6th point is something that we always say in our family, and promotion comes from the Lord. And I like this part a lot because it's the last verse in the story. It says, oh, I moved it. It says, God promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the province of Babylon. So not only did they go through what they went through, but stood up for God. He's like, oh, I'm going to reward you because you were faithful and you served me. He promoted them. They had just been promoted in chapter 2. That's some quick promotions right there. That's, I don't know the time frame, but it just be funny. Chapter 2, chapter 3, they got 2 promotions. And they stood up and trusted God, and he rewarded them. That's how bad I write reward right there. Sometimes we have to work through the flames to see the reward. Not losing track of God and working as though he's watching us. My mom used to tell us that all the time. It's like, don't work for yourself. Work as though God's watching. And that means, obviously what it means. Don't cut corners. Be on time. Work hard and show why you're there. Because you're submitting. You're serving. You have a boss and you're serving. And that alone, those good things alone will get you promotions. But he's telling you to, in the flames. Trust me. When the promotion took 2 years, when it took 3 years, when it took a long time, when you felt like your work wasn't being appreciated, did you stop? Did you stop doing what he's told you to do? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't, and they were promoted for it twice. That's quick. Not losing track of God and working as though he's watching. Stand up for God. Putting him first in our lives, trusting God is the answer to our flames. Not working for money, but for God. Not for gold, but for God. Because remember, I love this one. Fire can melt gold, but it can't melt God. That's my little cheesy one for it. I loved that one. Like, yes, I'm gonna use that one. Remember, fire can melt gold. That's how strong it is. Gold is nothing compared to it. It can be refined. It can be made into something else, but it can't melt God. I love that. Like, it couldn't. God was on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I've said that so many times, I can't say it right anymore. He was clearly on them, but they couldn't be melted, because God couldn't be melted. But King Nebuchadnezzar's gold could be melted. His prophet, what made him king, all that could be taken away. But God couldn't be taken away from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they believed. And one of my last points, actions versus words. As I said before, they don't have much to say, but what they do is powerful. And I say they don't have a lot of words because it's such a small story. It didn't paint that picture for us that they really stood up with their words. But it's a clear example of their actions. And it's a great example. These 3 men are a great example of how we can live our lives. Not compromising to this world or society, but by trusting God to pull us through, to walk us through. They walked out of the fire. Just walked out. We're not alone. Just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God is with us if we choose. They didn't fear, even when King Nebuchadnezzar churned up the heat 7 times. Didn't faze them. King Nebuchadnezzar saw the power of God in the flames and not the power of gold. He began to praise God and declare to him the one true God. Is, is King Nebuchadnezzar an example to us of people who have not seen the power of God? The power of God in our lives? Can our actions be seen? Can you see God on my life? What would our lives look like if lived like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Because it's a simple story. And that's why I loved it so much when I got it, because what would it look like? It's fireproof faith. That's what it looks like. You can't be burned. You can't be fazed by hard times, by the devil's lies. And in closing, in a sense, I love this story because it teaches us so much and so small, but it's mighty. And it's probably a lot of verses and chapters in the Bible that are mighty. But man, when I got this, it changed me. It made me want to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I had to ask myself those hard questions. Can my coworkers see the likeness of God in me? Can my boss see it? It's a good question to ask daily. And what God is doing here at Ignite Churches is big. Stepping out and stepping up for God. Walking 3 steps from your comfort zone to the uncomfort zone for Him. It's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to do. They had to lay their lives down, in a sense, for their promotion. I'm not saying I was promoted, but I'm saying there was something greater for them. The Lord said, I'll give you this if you trust me. Or in a sense, do this for me and I'll trust you with this. And that's work. That's life. Sometimes we have to step up out of the shadows and of this world even and get uncomfortable. Because God's asking us to trust Him. And in this time and age where it's not easy to trust a lot of people, because I don't mean that in a hard way, just in a sense, He's asking us to trust Him, not King Nebuchadnezzar. And it's funny because I've already seen what you all can see. If you've been here, you can see what He's doing. You can see people stepping out of their own comfort zone. It's becoming contagious here. And that's one thing that really inspired me. We have Levi stepping out and playing guitar. Then because he did that, God said, no, I'll give you more. He starts playing piano. And then the crazy thing is, you did that for me, now I'm going to give you another thing. I'm going to give you a voice. And it may have already been there, but we didn't know it, right? He said he trusted God with his talents that he could learn, and God gave him more. And same with Allie. She stepped up and started singing, and I believe she is blessed, but I believe she has something greater coming towards her way. And it's because you trusted God to step out. And now He's trusting you with more. You came out of your comfort zone and stepped into uncomfort. But remember what I said, God is taking what's uncomfortable and making it comfortable. And you could see it on this stage. And I don't know everyone's story here, but you could clearly see it. Megan has had that happen to her a couple years ago. where she didn't know she was going to be a lead singer for a worship team all by herself for a couple months, but she wanted more, and God gave her more. And it starts with one person, and it's contagious. Dilva's up here playing piano with us. We didn't know, we knew you played piano, but the courage came from nowhere. I assume, like, you were ready, you stepped up. You're also receiving something that God's trusting you with now that you may not see yet. And last one on the stage is me. Sorry. God told me to do the same thing. It's like, you see it. Does it not inspire you to want more? Levi, Ali, Megan, Dilva, you've all inspired me to do more. And I hope I'm doing the same for you. Not in a selfish way, but for what God has given me. And I want everyone to have it. And that's why when I thought it was for me, he revealed to me that it wasn't for me. It's for everybody. Anyone that would want it. Anyone that would listen. And it may be few, but it'd be mighty. Imagine this group of people with fireproof faith. I love that. Like the faith to go through anything that comes your way, to share it with your coworkers, with your boss, because courage, you see the courage in their lives. They had to have it. But it wasn't just courage and faith. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but this story and what I was focusing on was courage, faith, and obedience. 3 men had 3 things. Whether they had it separately, I don't know, but they strengthened each other. But courage to stand up against King Nebuchadnezzar, faith to act it out, and obedience because God told him to. It's crazy what you don't expect blessings. I don't like to expect blessings from stepping out, but it's funny what God does for you just in doing what he asks. And just a little testimony of my blessings, just, it's funny. I've been praying with my mom for about 2, maybe a couple years now for a promotion at work, because I've been working hard. I don't ask for it, but I work hard, and I work for God. And the moment I accepted this, to be up here and to change what I was living like, he gave me more. I trusted and was obedient to God telling me to do this. And if you, like my mom said, you knew me, 3 steps was a lot of steps to get to this point. And a week later, I got my promotion last week. And I don't expect, and it's always greedy, I feel, to expect God to do something if you do something for him. But with the right intentions, he'll give you more. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that. Or I hadn't been listening. And he told me, thank you. Now you can have more. It was crazy how immediate it was of me stepping out of my comfort zone for God to give me more. And more responsibility at work, more favor. My company was sold. They decided to sell my portion of the company that I was in. And they took 5 people with them. And I was one of them. And that meant a lot to me. And I worked hard for that. and I worked for God for that. And that's just the blessings that God can give. I don't know exactly, but I know Levi he got his promotion a couple months ago, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it was around the same time as you were stepping up and changing and doing something different for God and with your voice, with your hands, and I don't believe it was a coincidence. And it's contagious, and I want that for everybody. It's super contagious right now. And I kidded with Joe, and they were talking about he's been waiting for his promotion. I told him I had an answer for him, but I was being funny. I told him I had the answer for you, and I know Joe already does this, but it's funny. It's right here, and I'm not saying it's contagious that you're going to be playing bass and guitar for us. That'd be awesome, but it's contagious anywhere. It can be applied to anything. Stepping out of your comfort zone can mean talking to your coworkers. It can mean giving up the things that maybe aren't godly. It can be walking around, being a light to people that haven't seen one. They haven't seen God's power, like King Nebuchadnezzar. Can you be that power? Can our lives be seen that way? Would people notice if you lived like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? To see God's power in your lives? The world needs Christians stepping out of their comfort zone. And this is why this has been on my heart, because I want to step out of my comfort zone. This is just a start. I want to be a light for people in dark places. Lord of the Rings quote. I want to mean something to my coworkers. I want to mean something to my family, right? To my brothers. My brothers are they're all serving the Lord, but there's in some situations in families where they aren't. And we can be that testimony for them. An example of promotions in 2 chapters. How'd you get that? I don't know. I just worked hard and I trusted God with what I had, and He gave me more. Fearless faith. I kind of want to do something and end with this pretty much, so I'm almost done, but I would like prayer people to come up, and I want to ask Levi, Michelle, and Megan, and Allie to come up here, and if you want what's contagious, and Dilva, I want you to come up too. If you want what's contagious, it's here. It's just an action away. And I'm not saying you have to do it today. I'm not saying this is it, but it's contagious. And the Lord has put that word on my heart because it's evidence that it's contagious, but it's more. It's if you're ready for it, come get it. And I'm going to end with a nice little plaque one-liner. And then I'll ask my dad to come up and if he wants to close it or anything. But just reiterating on the stories is what a powerful, small story that is. And if we can grasp a hold of what it says and what a life like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego looks like and how we can act it out, the answers are right there in that story. Fireproof. Faith, courage, obedience. It gives us so many little examples of what we can get from all those things. Promotion. Faith through the hard times. And so much more. And I love that you can pull that just from 30 verses. And that's what most of this Bible is. You can pull so much, the eye of the beholder. Anyone can see something different. And so I would, if you want, if you haven't asked Jesus in your life, come up and do that too in this moment. But if you want it, it's contagious. Promotion's contagious. I would come get it. But I want to end with this. When you're going through the flames of this world, when it feels like the heat's been turned up 7 times, is your faith, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, enough to get you through? Can others see the likeness of God on you through the flames? Through the flames. When you're in that hard time, can people still see God in you? Can they see strength and courage when they don't believe they could get through that same thing? Health, finances. You feel like you're burning. The devil's lied to you, told you you're not good enough, that you can't make it through. That doesn't have to be. Faith that is fireproof, that people can see by your actions. How much would this world be changed if we could find that? So I feel like I've found it. And my actions from here on, I hope, convey that. And if you want it, come get it. It's contagious.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the message. You can check us out on Instagram, Facebook, or online at ignitechurchoc.com.